After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the searching methods conducted in crime investigation, classification of physical evidences. In scientific investigation, physical evidence play an important role in linking the suspect and the victim with each other and with the scene of crime. Evidences are recognized, collected from a crime scene and sent to a laboratory for scientific analysis according to the requirements of the investigating officer. The physical evidences play a significant role in the investigation of crime according to Section 157 of Indian Criminal Procedure Code. The crime scene, being richest source of various type of evidences, must be searched thoroughly. In this module, various aspects of physical evidence have been discussed to classify on the basis of several different perspectives.
Now the method of search. The following different methods are available to conduct a thorough and methodical search to recognize, mark and collect the relevant physical evidences at the crime scene. However, the experienced investigator has to select either of the following appropriate methods individually or sometimes in combination. The method can be selected depending upon the conditions existing in the terms of size of the crime scene, any obstacles, scope of search and the number of people involved to conduct the search. In this, first method is strip method, second grid method, third spiral method and the fourth is quadrant method. After recovery of physical evidence either from the crime scene or victim or suspect need to be analyzed scientifically in the lab to establish a common origin of samples. A large part of the work in the scientific examination consists of making comparisons between question and known samples. In other cases where matching is achieved after comparison, the conclusion depends on the type of evidence involved. Fingerprints are uniquely individualizing only if sufficient details are available. Normally, evidences like bullets and cartridge cases can be connected to a particular firearm if recovered from the scene of crime. Physical matches also establish a common origin with the various types of evidences. Tracks and imprints can often be attributed to the objects which made them. The distribution of various parameters of blood, hair and other materials in the given population also made it possible to have even more potential to individualize. These kind of considerations need to be kept in mind while evaluating associated physical evidences comparisons. Forensic science have proved to be a powerful and effective tool in the investigation and prosecution of criminal cases if utilized properly at the crime scene. Therefore, in the present module, emphasis has been laid on different kinds of physical evidences and different schemes have been discussed to classify them. Now, the classification of physical evidence. To make optimum use of physical evidences, forensic scientists have tried to classify evidences in different ways on the basis of several different perspectives. Some of the classification systems are more useful than others, but none of the system, however, can incorporate all the perspectives into account individually. At first instance, one might wonder why physical evidences are classified. The following points will provide the answer. The class or type of evidence can be very important in determining its value. How has it been collected? What else need to be collected along with the samples such as controls and exemplars? And the most important is what sort of scientist tests should be conducted to draw various conclusions from them. Legal distinctions among different types of evidence help to determine their admissibility in the court of law. These schemes apply to all evidence, not only scientific or technical evidences. The following schemes to classify the physical evidence have been proposed by the scientists, which are comparatively more realistic than others. In this, the first is general nature of the evidence, type of material, the physical state of the evidence, the type of crime, types of question to be resolved, according to the way the evidence was produced and according to the appropriate laboratory approach. Every scheme is useful in offering a different conceptual perspective related to physical evidences, but some of them are more useful than others. Now, the general nature of the evidence. According to the general nature of evidence, the physical evidence can be classified as physical, chemical, or biological. In this scheme, the examples of physical would be a paint, plastic, glass, firearm, cartridge case, tool, tool marks, whereas a drug sample would be a chemical. Examples of biological would include hair, pollen grains, and blood stains, DNA, etc. Besides having limited value, these schemes might serve to remind the investigator the type of prosecution required to collect and preserve the items of the biological category which are perishable. Now, the types of material. This classification system of evidence is based on the type of material of which it is composed of, such as paint evidence, blood evidence, wood evidence, metallic evidence, glass evidence, plastic evidence, and paper evidence, etc. This scheme is of limited utility because a fingerprint found on a glass example is handled and examined essentially in the same manner as fingerprint found on any other non-porous substance like paint, polished metal, plastic, or a glossy photograph. Similarly, in the case of tool marks found on metal has to be examined and compared more or less in the same way as one found on some other type of materials. In these type of cases, the nature of the material itself is not very significant, but the way in which something has interacted with the substrate material and produce the evidence. But there are some exceptions which are also worth mentioning. If the nature of the material undergoes alteration with the passage of time, proper prosecution should be taken to preserve it, or at least to document. Examples include a bite mark on skin or perishable food, footprints in snow, tool marks on any other evidence that might evaporate, such as petrol. Individualization of materials can be attained on the basis of subtle differences present in their composition wherever required. Almost similar laboratory methods are used for materials that have been grouped together in this classification scheme. Microscopic fragments of glass, for example, would be compared using the same techniques regardless of the kind of objects involved: bottle, window, headlight, lamps. This scheme of classification is generally not much useful except for the above mentioned type of examples. Now, the physical state of the evidence. Evidences, like other matter, can be categorized on the basis of its physical state, like solid, liquid, or gas. Example of solid state category include most type of evidences encountered: cartridge cases, firearms, glass, tools, clothing, and papers, etc. Fewer items of evidence would be placed in the liquid or gas category. Important examples of liquid evidences include liquid blood samples, either evidence sample or known control, alcohol, and accelerants collected in connection with the investigation of suspected arson case. Gas samples may occur as evidence more often than one might think, but they are rarely recognized as such and evenly more rarely collected. A specific type of devices can be used to collect samples of gases and vapors at crime and fire scenes. This classification scheme is not useful in any general way. However, it can serve important role to remind investigators about the requirements to have secure packaging for liquid and gas samples so they do not get leaked or evaporate from their containers. This simple prosecution is often overlooked in case from where volatile residues collected for crime scenes. Excellent samples are analyzed in the laboratory, where the chances of getting useful results from an analysis of such samples are remote if not collected and packed properly. Now, the type of crime. Another system to classify the physical evidence is based on the type of crime from which it has been collected. Thus, for example, the evidence may be related to assaults, rape, homicides, burglary cases, and so on. This scheme might have value in certain situations, but it should be appreciated that any particular type of physical evidence can be found in connection with the investigation of virtually any kind of crime. Different physical evidences types cannot be restricted to legally defined crime classifications. For example, the blood stain evidence very frequently found in the investigations of assaults and homicides, but blood stains can also be recovered as important evidence at crime scenes related to burglary and other property crimes also. Similarly, tool marks evidence can be recovered from almost all types of serious crimes like homicide, assaults, and burglary. Therefore, there is some correlation existing between the type of crime and the time of evidence, but it is not as perfect as it should be. Unexpected, the unpredictable type of physical evidences could be the most crucial in the particular investigation and could be overlooked by the investigator with preconceived notions about what to expect and what is likely to be significant. Now, by the types of questions to be resolved. In this classification system, evidences are classified according to whether it will be useful in the reconstruction of the evidence by proving an element of the crime, in linking a suspect to a victim or to a crime scene, in excluding or exonerating a suspect, or in corroborating or disproving an alibi. Similarly, evidence can be grouped according to whether its analysis will be used to provide investigative assistance and leads, or as proof for eventual use in a court of law. These are very useful during the collection of evidences at the scene of crime. Now, the classification according to the way evidence was produced. In this system of classification, the evidences are classified according to how it relates to the act under investigation. An important thought here is the way the individual involved in the crime has interacted with the environment and with each other, and the type of evidences produced during these interactions. Physical evidences can be looked as a type of surfaces, substrate or recording medium on which they are present. Accordingly, laboratory examination and interpretation of evidence allow the forensic scientist to offer an opinion as to what has taken place and how. Thus, in other words, the physical evidence are unintentional and somewhat imperfect records of the interactions of the perpetrators and victims and with the environment. Considering physical evidences in this way can be very useful and can yield large dividends in any investigation. Within these general schemes, various subclasses of evidences can be distinguished and their applications can be used in crime investigations. In this, the location or the geometric. The apparent movement or disturbance of various objects is observed, documented and interpreted to reconstruct an event. Next is the imprints and indentations. Evidence in these categories include tool marks in the form of indentations formed by tools, primer marks, breech face marks, pry marks, imprints like track marks formed by tire, gait pattern, fingerprints, footprints and bite marks. Class and individual characteristic of the suspected devices making the imprint or indentation are compared with the details of the specimen marks produced in the selected recording medium as specimens. This particular type of comparison is usually accomplished by first producing a specimen mark in a suitable material at forensic science laboratory and are then compared inters with evidence mark. Now, striations. Striations, another type of tool marks, are produced when two surfaces come into sliding contact with each other. The marks resulted from a dynamic process are striations, in contrast to the static process, which results in the production of imprints and indentations. Striation marks consisting of numerous lines separated by grooves randomly spaced parallel streaks of varying length and width. Example of striation marks evidence are produced as markings on bullets, marks made by certain cutting tools like machine tools, wire cutters, thread cutters, bolt cutters, knives and axes, die marks on wires from the drawing operation, and extrusion marks on the certain plastic and metal articles. Striation marks can be produced in many varied situations where the surface of one object marks the surface of another become one of them is in motion relative to the other one. Certain kind of marks made by praying tools such as jimmies and screwdrivers where the tool slips across the surface falling in this category. Similarly, some teeth marks, bite marks like those made in biting off a piece of cheese or fruit, for example. Striation markings possess both class and individual characteristics which can be useful in the process of identification and individualization. Now, the perforation marks, tear, breaks and cuts. This includes another subcategory of the evidence which is often of the greatest interest of potential individualization, where one or more pieces or fragments of an article are compared with other articles from which they are thought to have originated. If a sufficient number of individual characteristics are present, then it becomes possible to conclude that the items share a common origin and were part of the same piece. A glass fragment could be the best example to associate it with the particular window from which it was broken by fitting it into the area from which it was originated. Physical fit of this kind can be simple but achieved mostly with larger piece, at times become possible with the smaller fragments too. Such physical matches or jigsaw fits are applicable to a wide variety of other materials including wood, cloth, metal, plastic, paper and cartridge, etc. Sometimes evidence such as paint chips can also fit into this category. If the chips recovered are big enough, it may be possible to fit them into the position on the object from which it was originated. Now, the perforation marks. Another example of physical fit can be perforation marks punched into a recipient box to separate the counterfoil. Bricks and tier normally provide the largest number of details for the potential individualization, but success is sometimes possible in cases of cut pieces as well. In some of these cases, the individualization potential depends less on the nature of the cut, broken or torn surfaces than on various features on or within the body of the article. Examples of such features include writing, printing, designs, surface topography, grain structures, pigmentation patterns, and characteristic irregularities. Now, the mutual transfer of matter. In an accident case, transfer of paint in the form of smear or chip evidence is result of contact between two surfaces and involves the mutual transfer of matter across the contact surface. Other evidences that can be included in this category are dust particles, clothing fibers, vegetations, hair, soil, pollens, and small glass particles. According to Locard principle, mutual transfer or matter always occur when two substances come into contact, but the amount of material transferred in some circumstances may be in traces and is practically not significant. But in other cases, the transfer may appear to be one way rather than mutual, or no transfer is either direction may be apparent. Now, deposits and residues. In this category, the matter is transferred without any contact between the surface from where that matter originated and the surface on which it is transferred. GSR, gunshot residues, explosive residues, fallen hairs, blood, glass fragments, oil drippings, and airborne particles are examples of this category. Such evidence may possess both class and individual characteristics and play important role in the construction of an event. Now, the classification according to the appropriate laboratory approach. All the samples which are referred to the laboratory must be accompanied by the list of query related to the examination in the lab. In this scheme, the evidence can be categorized on the basis of the type of the following examination required. In this, the first is identification, second is individualization, and third is reconstruction. The evidence is examined which is relevant to the investigation. Now, the identification. This process is dependent on the class characteristic of the physical evidences. In some cases, only identification of a certain physical evidence item is required, but the individualization and reconstruction may become necessary in other cases to prove the charge of possession of a prohibited substance. The laboratory tests are used to establish an element of the crime. A similar situation confronted in some of the rape investigations where the element of penetration has to be established by demonstrating the presence of seminal fluid in the vagina of the victim. In other rape investigations, another type of evidences like hair, soil, and fibers may be found, and more analysis may be required to test the body fluid evidences. These represent the class characteristics. Criteria for the identification of physical evidences include morphological, physiological, and chemical properties. However, combination of some of these properties can provide useful information in achieving individualization also. Now, the next is individualization. After identification of the material with class characteristic, individualization is attempted based on the individual characteristic of the physical evidence like fingerprints, broken glass, tool marks, paint chips, and marking on the bullets, etc. The direct physical comparisons and physical matches, jigsaw fits, techniques can also yield persuasive individualizations under favorable circumstances. In addition, other comparative techniques may be applied in evaluating the likelihood of common origin. Now, this particular table is showing various properties of the physical evidences. In this, the first block is of chemical properties, in which the chemical composition, pH, reactivity towards known chemical reagents, and solubility is given. The second block is of physical features and patterns markings. First in this is markings on the evidences like bullets, second is morphology, third is seizure, and fourth is texture. Now the third block is of physical properties non-optical. In this, the density, hardness, melting point, boiling point, surface tension, viscosity, radioactivity is written. Now in the last block, physical properties are optical. In this, the refractive index, dispersion, and birefringence are written. Now, the reconstruction is a final step of any criminal investigation. It refers to the process of putting together the pieces of a case or situation with the objective to reach an understanding of a sequence of past events. It can be achieved on the basis of physical evidence that has resulted from the events. Reconstructions are regularly desired in criminal cases where bloodstains or bloodstain patterns, gunshot residue patterns, shotgun pellets patterns, and relatively large fragments of broken glass are involved. Other evidence can also play a major role in reconstruction. A bullet hole through a material would probably provide adequate information about the bullet's trajectory. Similarly, relationship among several other items of physical evidences can play a useful role in reconstruction. Now, the next is workable classifications. It is evident from the undergoing discussion that all the classification schemes suggest that the understanding of physical evidences and their utilization is the most important. The classification schemes are probably the most useful and practical for those evidences that does not fit nearly into any of the above mentioned schemes under every circumstances, maybe because of their nature. Different methods are available to conduct a thorough and methodological search to recognize, mark, and collect the relevant physical evidences at the crime scene. Forensic science has proved to be a powerful and effective tool in the investigation and prosecution of criminal cases if utilized properly at the crime scene. According to the general nature of items, the physical evidence can be classified as physical, chemical, or biological. Evidence in these categories include tool marks in the form of indentation formed by tools, primer marks, breech face marks, pry marks, imprint like track marks formed by tire, gait patterns, fingerprints, and bite marks. Individualization is attempted based on the individual characteristic of the physical evidences like fingerprints, broken glass, tool marks, paint chips, and marking on bullets, etc.